Finally tonight, the House GOP majority shrinking even more, which means House Speaker Mike Johnson's life just got harder. Today, Republican Congressman Ken Buck of Colorado announcing that he's going to resign next week. It will further narrow the GOP's razor-thin majority. House Republicans will only be able to lose 2 votes, assuming all Democrats vote together. Buck has been a thorn in the GOP side for a while now, lamenting that the GOP is too beholden to Donald Trump in general.
I am not going to lie on behalf of my presidential candidate, on behalf of my party, and I'm very sad that others in my party have taken the position that as long as we get the White House, it doesn't really matter what we say.
Now, it's unclear what Buck's next move is, but today he was slamming his fellow Republicans.
But a lot of this is personal, and that's the problem. Instead of having decorum, instead of operating in a professional manner, this place has just evolved into this bickering and nonsense.
Truer words never been said. The Readout with Joy Reid, it's up next.
Tonight on The Readout.
It's about trying to pull the wool over the eyes of America, because the tyrants and dictators of the world are on the march today. So who wins with this ludicrous, embarrassing spectacle? Orban wins, Putin wins, Xi wins, the tyrants of the world win. They have one more reason to celebrate Donald Trump and his cult followers.
Congressman Jamie Raskin speaking the truth as Biden's special prosecutor Robert Hur testifies before a congressional committee, where the latest Republican attempt to smear the president comes up embarrassingly short. Also tonight, Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock joins me as polls close in his state's presidential primary, and he has a warning about voter suppression ahead of the presidential election this fall. Plus, a new U.S. intelligence report suggests Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu could be on thin ice due to the war in Gaza. Today, I spoke with former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, who says he agrees with President Biden that Netanyahu is hurting Israel more than he's helping.
Prime Minister Netanyahu is not acting in line with what I think is the basic strategic interest of the State of Israel, and I completely agree with President Biden.
But first, polls are closing right now in Georgia's presidential primary, even though it is pretty obvious at this point who the nominees for each party will be. Tonight is expected to be the night that President Biden and Donald Trump both cross the delegate threshold to officially clinch the title of presumptive nominees. So let's start with Steve Kornacki at the big board where he lives, because we never let him go home. Steve Kornacki, what are we looking for tonight?
Yeah, Joy, as we speak, Joe Biden is on the cusp of formally locking up the Democratic nomination. He has 1,869 delegates. There are 1,968 needed to clinch a first ballot nomination. In other words, he needs 99, and the polls have just closed in Georgia. Of the 3 states right now voting on the Democratic side, Georgia closes at 7. We are waiting any minute now, any second now, potentially. We're expecting the results to start coming in. And, you know, obviously with Biden having really no opposition here, you assume, and based on all the results we've seen in other primaries, that this will be an overwhelming and swift victory for Joe Biden. And if you see that with the early results that come in, those delegates could be allocated very quickly, and Georgia has 108 of them. So it's very possible that in the next few minutes, as we start to get results from Georgia, Joe Biden will quickly wrap up the 99 that he needs to clinch the nomination. And again, you could just see that would put him over 1968. That would make him officially, I mean, it will become truly official at the convention this summer, but he will have pledged delegates bound in their commitments, more than enough to give him the first ballot nomination. So we're waiting on Georgia. For the Democrats, we are also waiting for it. I can show you on the Republican side here, where Donald Trump is sitting at 1,089 delegates, 1,215 the magic number on the Republican side. Trump 126 short. Now, he's not going to get it in Georgia. There are only 59 delegates for the Republicans at stake in Georgia. Mississippi will close at 8. There are 40 there. So Trump will not get it in the early hours tonight. Most likely, it'll be 11 o'clock Eastern time. Washington State, the polls will close then. There are 43 delegates at stake there. And so likely, in that 11 o'clock hour, Donald Trump will cross the threshold, and you'll have both major party candidates reaching their delegate magic numbers, as I just check in with Georgia again here, reaching their delegate magic numbers tonight, locking in the pledged delegates they need to win their party's nominations on the first ballot. And by the way, we went back and we did do a little research on this. If that is indeed what happens tonight, before midnight, and I stress the term before midnight, then it will actually set the stage mathematically for the longest general election campaign in modern American history. There would be 240 days from now until the election on November 5th, and both candidates would have clinched their party's nominations. The earliest that's happened before, there's actually a couple elections where it happened 239 days before the general election. So if it happens before midnight tonight, this will be a 240-day campaign from this point forward, and that would be matter of some trivia here, because a lot of folks have been prepping, obviously, for a Biden-Trump race a lot longer than just tonight. But in terms of both candidates actually locking down those numbers, that could come, if it comes before midnight, it will be the longest general election campaign ever, mathematically, at least by that metric. So again, the polls have closed in Georgia. We expect this map to begin lighting up. I know Georgia can be a little slow in the early going, but we will see, because any results that come in here, if they're what we expect, it could be very quick in terms of Biden being declared the winner here and getting those delegates and becoming the Democratic nominee by numbers.
See, Steve, this is why I love you, because you anticipate my every question, because that's literally what I was going to ask you, is would this be the earliest that we've locked in? I mean, it is unusual, because essentially you have sort of a dual incumbent race, right? You've got a sitting president running against a former president, and it's very early. So you anticipated me. So anticipate this as well, my friend. If it comes in, if you've got a call, wave your hands in the air. Somehow through the magic of TV, we will see you, and we'll come back. Wait a minute.
I can tell you, we just got our first report here.
Go for
it. And this is from Floyd County. It's 66 votes. Sometimes this precipitates, when you see the first one, sometimes you get a couple more right away. So I give pause here for a few seconds to see if anything lights up. Nothing immediately here, but we're starting to get it. And like I said, I mean, look, it's 100%. 66 votes, but Biden getting every single one of them. So it probably will not take much from these counties for that pattern to be established and this to happen. So yes, I will absolutely flag you as soon as we see that.
Really quickly, before I let you go, Stephen, we weren't going to let you go for long, but how quick of a counting state is Georgia?
Yeah, I mean, if this were a competitive election tonight, it would take a while. That first, we got a little bit more here too. Pulaski County. So now we've got a third county coming in here.
They seem quick.
Yeah, and we're, again, now 93% for Biden, 100% for Biden, 98% for Biden. So, I mean, you're already just seeing, obviously there was no suspense, he's going to win it.
Sure.
And he's going to get that 95% plus. Then just the way the delegates work on the Democratic side, to tell you what they're looking for here, the number that's Biden's enemy here, just from the delegate standpoint, is 15%. If any of the other candidates on the ballot are getting 15%, they can start collecting delegates. Obviously, in these early returns here, nobody is even remotely in the ballpark of 15%. So that pattern would then establish Biden, put him in position to win all delegates. Again, 108 at stake here. He needs 99 of them. And if that happens, he crosses the magic number. So if you can't tell, I'm stretching a little bit for time here, because we did get those three, and I'm waiting on more. It can be a little slow in Georgia, I know, in the early going, and a little sporadic. But like I said, certainly based on these first. Now we got a few more here.
Sure.
Again, 96, 95, 93, 100% unanimous in Floyd County, 98% in Pulaski. And I think there it is, Joy. The stretching has paid off. Joe Biden, our decision desk, has just projected will win Georgia. And let's go back now and there it is. He has now crossed with that. He gets the necessary delegates. We've just allocated him 104 of them. And so he has now crossed the number. 1968 was needed. Biden now at 1973. He's the presumptive nominee. Those are pledged delegates. Their commitments will be binding. So Joe Biden has the necessary delegates to win the Democratic nomination on the first ballot. To the extent there was any remaining suspense, it has been eliminated. Joe Biden, the presumptive nominee.
And it took all of 8 minutes. Steve Kornacki, the Kornackster, as we like to call him, even not in khakis, always effective in bringing us the info we need. Thank you, my friend. Much appreciated. All right, joining me now is, as it turns out, Democratic Senator from Georgia, Raphael Warnock. Senator, your state, it is kind of poetic, is it not? It was Georgia that delivered the 2 Senate seats that gave Democrats back the majority, yours being one of the 2, Senator Ossoff being the other one. It was your state that so enraged Donald Trump that he committed acts which have now led him to felony charges in your state. It was your state where he said he just needed to find 13,000 odd votes and asked your Secretary of State to do that for him, which he did not. And so there's a lot of poetry here. What do you make of the 8-minute suspense for Georgia delivering Joe Biden officially the nomination, or at least making him the presumptive nominee?
Well, good evening, Joy. Great to be with you. And although I'm in D.C., let me say welcome again to Battleground Georgia. The country should know by now that Georgia shows up. And there is poetry and power that it was Georgia that's pushing him now over the finish line. He is our official nominee. We know that Georgia literally saved the whole country in 2021, sending its first African-American senator and its first Jewish senator to the United States Senate from Georgia in one fell swoop. And if that had not happened, let me just give you one point. Ketanji Brown Jackson would not be sitting on the Supreme Court. And so Georgia did this on January 5th. As you point out, we saw a violent insurrection pushed forward by this ex-president on January 6th. And in a real sense, that's what this election is about. Are you going to choose the America of January 5th that would send a kid who grew up in public housing, the first African-American senator from Georgia, to the Senate, and a Jewish kid also mentored by John Lewis? Or are you going to give in to the forces of resentment and revenge and retribution that guide Donald Trump? I choose January 5th. I choose an America that embraces all of us.
Well, you mentioned, of course, yourself and Senator Ossoff and Ketanji Brown Jackson and all those changes. All of that happened despite your state being in some ways a marquee for voter suppression. Your governor, Brian Kemp, who, when he was Secretary of State, almost arithmetically attempted to remove voters from the polls and then very ceremoniously signed a voter suppression law under a portrait of a plantation. And yet, you have had your state have very high voter registration. What do you make of the state of voting rights at this point, Senator? Because there is a John Lewis Voting Rights Act that does exist, that I understand is potentially going to be reintroduced in the Senate. What's the state of voting rights in your state and nationally?
Well, I introduced or reintroduced the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act just a few days ago. I testified regarding it in the Senate Judiciary hearing earlier today. After I won, after John Ossoff won, the state of Georgia actually doubled down on its voter suppression tactics. And the question we have to ask ourselves is why, and also how. We know why. They looked at the power of us standing together, the movement of a multiracial democracy emerging in our country, the future of our country, and they went after it, as one court has said in another hearing, with surgical precision. That's what SB 202 was about. It's about voter suppression and making it difficult for us to do what we did. But how is it that they were able to do it? It's because in 2013, the Supreme Court really gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that's been reauthorized time and time again on a bipartisan basis. We would not have SB 202 in Georgia with its awful voter suppression provisions. We likely would not have it if we had that powerful tool of pre-clearance that used to stop these bad things from happening before they happen. And that's why I reintroduced the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act a few days ago. And before that, we introduced the Freedom to Vote Act. We are seeing, and we saw in my election, record turnout. But let's be very clear. Just because people stood in long lines and endured the rain and in order to vote. That doesn't mean there isn't voter suppression. The people just decided that they weren't going to have their voices silenced. The truth is, the Brennan Center recently released a study that showed that, sadly, the gap between white voter turnout and black voter turnout has actually widened. And so we need this tool. We need these tools. It used to be passed on a bipartisan basis, and I'm urging my colleagues, Democrats and Republicans, to do what's right, protect our democracy in a moment in which we're watching an insurrectionist ex-president trying to diminish it in every way.
Very quickly, two quick questions. When it comes to the prosecution of Donald Trump in your state of Georgia, do you anticipate that Fani Willis will still be the prosecutor by Monday coming? Because we know a decision is coming this week.
Well, I'm not going to speculate on that. We will see. That's a decision that will be made by a judge. I'll tell you this. There are those who seem to be trying to put their finger on the scale in Georgia. I'm not going to add to that, politicize it. A judge will make a decision, but he must make that decision based on the law. Here's what I know. Trump deserves a fair hearing before a jury of his peers. Those are Georgia voters. And given the seriousness of the charges, I hope to see him in court.
Let me ask you another question, because we know that one of the ways that Donald Trump and Republicans are hoping to demagogue their way back into, control of the White House and to hold on to control of the Senate, control of the House and gain control of the Senate, is the immigration issue. And they've been truly demagoguing an issue of a Georgia young woman who was killed, a Georgia young nursing student named Laken Riley. They've now passed a law called the Laken Riley Act. All Republican members and 37 Democrats voted in the House to support the bill. The legislation requires the detention of any migrant who's been accused of burglary or theft. My understanding is that burglary and theft are already illegal. What does this law add to the current existing law? Is it just a messaging bill? Does it do anything or change anything? I will note for our audience that overall crime is down this year across this country. And migrant crime is negligible. Crime by migrants is negligible. What does this law do? Does it do anything?
Let me first of all just say that my heart goes out to this young woman's family. Laken Riley did not deserve what happened to her. To answer your question succinctly, this is smoke and mirrors by people who are not serious. We had a bipartisan piece of legislation in front of us. It had a lot of provisions, some provisions that some folks on my side didn't like. But the only way to get comprehensive immigration reform, the only way to address the current crisis on the border in divided government is on a bipartisan basis. And so rather than demagoguing this tragic death by this young woman, they ought to get serious. And let's pass some bipartisan legislation and deal with the crisis at the border.
I have to let you go, but I will note that your Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, has anticipated turnout for this primary is only 10%. Very quickly, give us a word, Senator and also Pastor. How do we get people to participate in these primaries rather than wait for the general and then complain about the choices that they have on the general election ballot?
Well, the choice between us couldn't be more stark, between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. And literally, the future of the democracy itself is at stake. I often say that a vote is a kind of prayer for the world we desire for ourselves and for our children, and our prayers are stronger when we pray together. Let's show up and pray with our lips and with our legs, with our hearts, our hands, and our feet. The momentum is at Joe Biden's back, but we'll keep pushing until November.
I will note that Joe Biden is reaching the threshold to become the presumptive nominee before Donald Trump, so he's already beaten Donald Trump tonight in one way. Senator Raphael Warnock of the great state of Georgia, thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Great to be with you.
All right, thank you. And up next, turns out the whole Republican special counsel narrative that President Biden has memory issues is a total lie. Who'd have thunk it? We'll be right back. Today on Capitol Hill, we were presented with the latest embarrassing example of the constant clown show antics of one of the supposed political parties in our country, as House Republicans held a hearing with former special counsel Robert Hur on his investigation of President Biden's handling of classified documents. The Republicans' primary goal was to create sound bites to run on right-wing media, where they aimed to portray President Biden as somehow simultaneously a fragile, elderly invertebrate who can barely tie his shoes and also a deviously brilliant master criminal.
Joe Biden had 8 million reasons to break the rules, took classified information and shared it with the guy who was writing the book. That's why he did. He knew the rules, but he broke them for $8 million in a book advance.
All I have to do when I'm caught taking home classified materials to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Herbert, but I'm getting old. My memory's not so great.
Biden and Trump should have been treated equally. They weren't, and that is the double standard.
Well, however, as they usually do, Republicans failed. They couldn't sustain the lie because it doesn't make any sense. And when all was said and done, the fact that Biden was never charged came down to one thing.
We did not, however, identify evidence that rose to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Because the evidence fell short of that standard, I declined to recommend criminal charges against Mr. Biden.
Now, let's not forget that a major part of this hearing was Republicans hoping to keep alive Mr. Hur's gratuitous description of Biden in his report as a sympathetic, well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory and diminished faculties. While having nothing to do with the classified documents, Hur made the claim in his report that during his 5-hour interview, Biden was unable to remember key dates, including when his son Beau died of cancer. Oh, and you better believe the right wing ran with that claim as further proof that Biden is too old to be commander-in-chief. Yeah, except we now have the transcript of the interview right here that shows it was a lie. And even when Hur was called out on it today by Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, he doubled down.
I want to give you a chance, since the transcript is out, to correct the record on an important point. Very sadly, your report on page 208 says that Mr. Biden couldn't come up with the date, the year of his son Beau Biden's death, when in fact in the transcript it shows that you asked him the month. And do you know what he said, Mr. Hur? He said, oh God, May 30th. Would you like to correct the record? His memory was pretty firm on the month and the day.
Congresswoman, I don't believe that's correct with respect to the transcript.
Oh, well, Mr. Hur, we have the transcript too. And here it is, right here on page 82 and 83 of the transcript, okay? It seems that it was Biden who brought up his son's death on his own when discussing where he kept papers related to what he was working on after leaving office. And then Biden says the following. Okay, remember, in this time frame, my son is either been deployed or is dying. And so it was. And by the way, there were still a lot of people at the time when I got out of the Senate that were encouraging me to run in this period, except the president. Now, I'm not, it's a mean thing to say. He just thought Hillary had a better shot of winning the presidency than I did. And so I hadn't at this point. Even though I'm at Penn, I hadn't walked away from the idea that I may run for office again. But if I ran again, I'd be running for president. And so what was happening, though, what month did Beau die? Oh, God, May 30th. Then his aides chime in right away, tossing out a year. Cotton, 2015. Unidentified male speaker, 2015. Biden, was it 2015 he had died? Unidentified male speaker. It was May of 2015. Biden, it was 2015. Now, that hardly sounds like a man of diminished faculties. It sounds like a conversation. And in fact, when it came to Biden's memory, Hur actually complimented him during the interview, even though that never came up in the report.
You said to President Biden, you appear to have a photographic understanding and recall of the House. Did you say that to President Biden?
Those words do appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Photographic is what you said. Is that right?
That word does appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Never appeared in your report, though. Is that correct? The word photographic?
That does not appear in my report.
You see, funny how that happened, right? That's not to say, of course, that Biden never makes a gaffe when he's speaking. We all know that he does, but that is nothing new. And in fact, Democrats pointed out during the hearing that if Republicans were so concerned about a leading candidate's memory, they might want to look to their own party candidate. The hypocrisy doesn't stop there. Congressman Jim Jordan, a man who broke the law by defying a congressional subpoena, dramatically feigned outrage about the mishandling of classified documents.
Mr. Hur produced a 345-page report. But in the end, it boils down to a few key facts. Joe Biden kept classified information. Joe Biden failed to properly secure classified information. And Joe Biden shared classified information with people he wasn't supposed to. Joe Biden broke the law.
Hey, Jim, if you think it's a crime for Biden to have had these classified documents, some of which were actually personal diaries that he kept at his home, why don't you think it's a crime for Donald Trump to have classified documents, some classified at the highest level, including on our nuclear programs, stashed in one of his bathrooms at Mar-a-Lago? And unlike in Biden's case, there is more than enough evidence against Trump that rises to the level of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Adding to the mountain of evidence is former Mar-a-Lago employee Brian Butler, who CNN is identifying as Trump Employee 5 in the special counsel's indictment, something NBC News has not independently confirmed. Among the events and conversations Butler claims to have told investigators about is how he unknowingly helped Trump's co-defendant, Walt Nauta, move boxes that held classified materials, as well as overhearing Australian billionaire Anthony Pratt repeat classified information after meeting with Trump.
He finishes his meeting with the former president, gets in the car, and his chief of staff says, "How did the meeting go?" Pratt, without saying, just says, "He told me," and it would be, U.S. military, classified information of what he told him about Russian submarines and U.S. submarines. And that's really all I remember hearing, and I went, what? I'm thinking this. I'm in the car, I'm like, did I just hear that?
Now, as a reminder, when that news broke last year about Trump's alleged disclosure of classified information to the Australian billionaire, Trump denied it, calling it fake news that he shared such information with the, quote, red-haired weirdo from Australia. And as you'd expect, even with this latest corroboration from this former Mar-a-Lago employee, the Republicans remain silent on Trump's alleged crimes. Joining me now is Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, who, as you saw, participated in today's hearing as a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congresswoman, I have to go back and focus in on the what looks like a lie, that President Biden could not remember the thing he talks about all the time, which is the tragedy of his son's death.
Yes.
Talk about that just for a moment and how that felt in the room to have him really not want to admit that he made that up.
Well, I have to tell you, when I read the report initially, when it was released and we read the report and then we read reporting on the report, remember the report starts with this one sentence: "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter."
Yeah.
That really could have been the summation of the report.
Yep.
But he goes on to say that many, many times. But we said initially it appeared to me gratuitous that he would throw in this information or his own reading of the president's memory. I'm not sure his expertise in that.
Right.
And I found it particularly irksome and indecent that he would quiz the president on the death of his son, Beau Biden, from brain cancer.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? A veteran and a public servant. And so when the transcript hit today, we took a look to say, did Biden really not know?
Yeah.
And of course, you read it from page 82.
Yeah.
My God, May the 30th.
Yeah.
So it was so gratuitous. And when they wrote, if you take a look at Special Counsel Herr's report, it's on page 208 that he criticizes his memory, couldn't remember this, this, and this, couldn't remember the year of Beau's death. When they were writing that and finalizing it, wouldn't you think somebody in the room would have said, wait a second, do you remember what he said early on in the transcript? My God, May the 30th. And I said, what a searing, I'm a parent myself. I have not suffered such a horrible loss.
Yeah.
But what a searing memory.
Absolutely.
Of course he remembered his son's death.
Absolutely. And I mean, and look, I just wrote a book. You go back and forth to the transcripts when you're trying to write based on transcripts. The lucky thing is you have the transcripts. He could have literally just looked. I want to play a back and forth that you had with Mr. Herr. And this was about what he said about Donald Trump. Take a listen.
Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts.
Keep going.
Congresswoman, I'm happy to have you read the words in my report.
Well, it's your report, so I think it actually is more fitting that you read those.
Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite.
Voila. Because the core of the Republicans' argument today, particularly Jim Jordan, was that Donald Trump and Joe Biden, President Biden and Donald Trump are being treated differently. Yeah. Clearly not.
Tremendous contrast. And Mr. Herr laid out the contrast. That's why I asked him to read
He was reading his own words, yeah.
And he didn't want me to do that. He would have preferred I did it. He didn't want to use those damning words. But the contrast could not be clearer. We had Mr. Biden who said, come search my house, come search my office. If anything is there, take it, please.
Yeah.
I had no knowledge that I had any of these classified materials. And from the indictment in Mar-a-Lago, just the Mar-a-Lago indictment on these documents, do you remember the circus that was going on, the criminality that was going on, moving the documents, hiding the documents, lying to his own attorney, obstructing the FBI, obstructing justice? When he was under subpoena, he's asking employees, could you please delete surveillance tapes? He's under subpoena at that moment.
Yeah.
So the differences could not be more stark. And that's why I wanted to say, number one, you found there is no criminality here. There will be no charging. No charging. Why you were going into Mr. Biden's memory, I have no idea. And I think you saw some of my members on the Democratic side had some very interesting evidence of Mr. Trump's failed memory.
I wish we had the clip of it, because you all played some of his inability to remember who his previous wife was. He doesn't seem to always know who the current president is.
No.
And in depositions, he's saying, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, and they don't have a problem with it. The last thing I'm going to point out, there's a piece in the New York Times that points out something that I think is true. And this is what it says. I can't imagine that Republicans would ever hire a Democrat to investigate a president of their own. In fact, Republicans would be more likely to appoint a wartime consigliere, as Mr. Trump did when he brought in William Barr to help defend him against the special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia inquiry. Is this a case where Democrats always seem to play by the Marquise de Queensberry rules and Republicans play in the gutter? Because I cannot imagine any, on the other side, Republicans allowing a Democratic, seemingly operative, to be the special counsel.
Well, I hope we remain above the fray. I hope we remain, that we believe in the rule of law, that we believe in the independence of the Department of Justice.
But should the Attorney General have done this investigation himself and not farmed it out to the special counsel?
I wish he had, to be very honest. But he was trying so hard to make sure that it didn't look like there was any undue influence or favor on any party. And so I get that, and Democrats maybe are guilty of that. But we better not let that line go, because we see where it's taking Mr. Trump and the people that he is dealing with. They don't mind breaking the rules. They don't mind ignoring the rule of law and thinking they are above it.
Let me very quickly, before we let you go, ask, Donald Trump has said his first act will be to pardon the January 6th insurrectionists. Your thoughts?
Oh, well, I was there on January the 6th, as you know. So many of us were. But America was there on January the 6th. Democracy was there on January the 6th. And it's very precious. It's sickening to me. He's also called them hostages. I'm wearing this chain for the hostages who remain in Gaza. We have serious problems in this country. We certainly don't want to re-elect the most corrupt, indecent president.
Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joy.
Much appreciated. And coming up, something fishy seems to be going on at Boeing. Does it have to do with the deregulation Republicans love so much? That's next. Regulation has long been a favorite boogeyman of the Republican Party for a long time, but especially since the era of Reaganomics. Republicans have done everything they can to block any effort to restrain corporate greed through government regulation, enabling a race among America's financial elites to restore themselves to the Gilded Age, the time before labor laws and income taxes. Elon Musk's SpaceX has been joined by Jeff Bezos' Amazon and other corporations trying to shut down the National Labor Relations Board, the agency that protects workers' rights. Folks like Elon Musk want a free run of the country, no taxes or regulations, just an economic wild, wild west to hoard extreme wealth. The downsides, of course, is that it doesn't always work out, since lax regulation is how you wind up with a situation like Boeing. The Justice Department has opened a criminal probe into Boeing after the blowout of a panel mid-flight on a 737 MAX plane in January. And a scathing FAA audit found that Boeing failed to comply with its own quality control procedures. Adding to Boeing's troubles, on Monday, a Boeing plane from South American airline LATAM abruptly dropped during a flight from Sydney to Auckland, New Zealand. injuring at least 50 passengers and crew members before pilots were able to regain control. Meanwhile, in South Carolina, police are investigating the death of a former Boeing employee turned whistleblower. 62-year-old John Barnett was found dead Friday from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. He had raised concerns about plane safety flaws in a 2017 whistleblower complaint and sat down with the Today Show in 2019.
From day one, it's just all been about schedule and hurry up and just get it done, push the planes out. We're behind schedule. You know, we don't have time to worry about issues that y'all bring up.
Barnett launched separate legal action against Boeing after retiring in 2017, accusing the company of denigrating his character. The case involving his 2017 whistleblower complaint was scheduled for trial in June. It would be nice to know what he was going to say. We'll be right back. A collision course over Gaza could be imminent, with President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu laying out contradictory red lines about the war. At the heart of this tension is whether a two-state solution between the Israelis and Palestinians is even possible, with the current Israeli government in power. Benjamin Netanyahu may represent the leader most opposed to a Palestinian state, but not all Israeli prime ministers were. In fact, one of the most famous proponents of a two-state solution was Ehud Olmert, who in 2008 met with Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas and came close to outlining a shared vision of peace between their two nations. It was the closest the two sides had ever come. Joining me now is Ehud Olmert, former Prime Minister of Israel. Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate the time. I want to start with that. You became prime minister, or you were prime minister at the time that Hamas took power in Gaza. You were, the mayor of Jerusalem during a very turbulent time in the 1990s when there was lots of terrorism, lots of conflict between Israelis and Palestinians. And yet, you've emerged from all of that as someone who believes in a two-state solution. Why do you think that it can happen, and do you think it will happen?
I believe that there may not be another political solution. Had someone come to me today and said, listen, I have a political solution that is workable and that Israel will not continue to be occupier of the territories of the Palestinians, and we have to try it. I would have listened. I would have thought about it. But to the best of my judgment, to the best judgment of anyone I know who knows anything about the Middle East, there can be no other political solution. Israel has to separate from the Palestinians. The Palestinians ought to have their own independent sovereign state and to exercise their right for self-determination. We can't continue the occupation and deny the Palestinians the right, the freedom of speech, the freedom of movement, the right of self-determination, political rights, voting rights. It's impossible. So we have to find a way to work it out with the Palestinians, with the assistance of the international community. And I think that because there cannot be any other solution, and because I firmly believe that it is against the basic fundamental interest of the State of Israel to continue the occupation, we will find a solution. Of course, for that, we need a different government in Israel and possibly also a different leadership of the Palestinians.
To that very point, I want to play what President Biden had to say to my colleague and friend Jonathan Capehart this weekend on MSNBC. Hope you can hear this. Take a listen.
He's hurting Israel more than helping Israel by making the rest of the world, it's contrary to what Israel stands for. And I think it's a big mistake. So I want to see a ceasefire.
He added, Netanyahu reacted criticizing Biden and saying that his criticism was unwarranted. But President Biden added that we cannot have 30,000 more Palestinians dead. And he does believe that Benjamin Netanyahu is hurting Israel. Do you?
Well, you possibly know that I'm in complete opposition to Netanyahu, and I think, and I said it many times, in Israel and outside of Israel, that Netanyahu has to go. And as soon as possible, as far as I'm concerned, today, anytime. He is not supporting what I think is the only possible option for an entirely different Middle East. I always say that the lack of peace between us and the Palestinians is largely dependent on the intransigence of the Palestinians for many years, including at the time that I was Prime Minister. I proposed to them a two-state solution and a comprehensive peace agreement, and they never said yes to it. So, but at this time, now, Prime Minister Netanyahu is not acting in line with what I think is the basic strategic interest of the State of Israel, and I completely agree with President Biden on what he said.
And there's a sort of an intelligence brief for the president and for the administration. It's a global intelligence assessment that says that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's hold on office may be in jeopardy, suggesting that Israel will fail to achieve its aims in Gaza in the war of completely eliminating Hamas. Again, you served as prime minister during the time when Hamas took power. Do you believe that Netanyahu's goal of eliminating Hamas is realistic? And what do you make of the fact that he is now backed by a hyper-religious, very extreme set of religious, I guess one could only call it zealots, that are keeping him in power?
Well, the goals that Netanyahu proposed are impossible to be achieved. There is no question that we are not going to eliminate Hamas completely. We have won the war already. We have won the war. We have killed more than 10,000 Hamas fighters, which is a devastation for the Hamas. We destroyed most of the tunnels. We destroyed their bunkers, their command positions, their launchers, most of the weapons and the rockets. So the question is how more we think that we need to go. I think that at this stage we have to agree to a ceasefire. I am completely aware of the terrible, terrible consequences to non-involved Palestinians. It is largely a result of the fact that Hamas started a war and butchered and massacred thousands of Israelis. But at this point now, what we have to do is to agree to a ceasefire, to bring back all the Israeli hostages that are still held by the Hamas. And we need to have an international intervention force that will take over the Gaza for a period of time until the Palestinians and the Arabs will be ready to step in and take it over.
Yeah.
But we are not going to completely eliminate Hamas. And we have done a great deal, and we won the war.
Let me ask you one final question. What do you think would materially change if Donald Trump becomes the next president of the United States as opposed to Joe Biden?
I don't think that he will have a different policy, except that I think that he will be a lot less patient with the prime minister if the prime minister will be Netanyahu. I heard some of the statements made by Trump already, which were very hostile towards Netanyahu. And I think that I must say I admire the patience manifested by President Biden and his support for the State of Israel and the distinction he makes between the State of Israel and the present Prime Minister of Israel, who is not supported and not trusted by most of the Israelis. I think that the only difference between Trump and Biden will be that Trump will be a lot more aggressive against Netanyahu than Biden is. And I must say I admire his patience and his dedication and support for the real interests of the State of Israel.
Well, I must say that I admire, sir, your persistent belief in peace and in finding a truly just solution for both the Israelis and the Palestinians. And I admire you, sir. So thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thank you very much, Joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Be well. We'll be right back. Well, that's tonight's readout. Be sure to stay with MSNBC for continuing coverage as Joe Biden secures the Democratic nomination and Trump inches closer to the Republican one as polls close in Washington State and Hawaii. All in with Chris Hayes starts now.
Of liberal democracy, not a foregone conclusion, apparently.
Not at all.
Woo, these times, Chris. Thank you, my friend.
You bet.
And thanks to you at home for joining me this hour. Today, the former special counsel who investigated President Biden's mishandling of classified documents, a man named Robert Hur, was grilled by House members on Capitol Hill. The former special counsel has already declined to charge President Biden with anything, concluding officially that nothing President Biden did was worthy of prosecution. But that did not stop Republicans in Congress from making a 4-hour circus out of Mr. Hur's testimony today. And that's because today's hearing wasn't actually about matters of law. It was about scoring political points. The reality here is that the only reason Joe Biden accidentally taking some classified documents with him when he left office, the only reason that matters at all is because Donald Trump willfully, purposefully took classified documents with him when he left office and then tried to obstruct justice to cover it all up. These two cases are not the same. But don't just take my word for that. Here is former special counsel Hur reading from his very own report on the matter.
Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts.
Keep going.
Congresswoman, I'm happy to have you read the words in my report.
Well, it's your report, so I think it actually is more fitting that you read those.
Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite.
Keep going.
According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it.
We'll get into Hur's apparent reluctance there to read aloud the negative parts about Donald Trump, even if they were parts he wrote. But Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, in this exchange, forced Mr. Hur to highlight the most important conclusion in this whole thing. In one case, Biden's, you have what seems to be a legitimate mistake, followed by full cooperation with law enforcement. And in the other, Trump's, you have what appears to be criminal intent and obstruction of justice. And as if to underscore the chasm that separates these cases, yesterday we got even more evidence of just how intentionally criminal Donald Trump's actions appear to be. On Monday, one of the witnesses in this classified documents investigation, one of the witnesses came forward. And up until yesterday, we knew this witness only as Trump Employee 5. CNN is now reporting that his name is Brian Butler. He was a longtime employee at Mar-a-Lago, and he witnessed some incredibly damning things, like the day that Trump flew from Florida to Bedminster in New Jersey. Trump's body man and his co-defendant, Walt Nauta, asked Mr. Butler to get Mr. Nauta a big SUV, an Escalade. Butler then saw Nauta and Trump's other co-defendant, Carlos de Oliveira, load the vehicle up with 10 to 15 banker's boxes and then drive them to Trump's plane and then load those banker's boxes onto the plane. Mr. Butler said that all took place on June 3rd, 2022. Now, later that same day, one of Trump's lawyers provided investigators with what he said was the entirety of classified documents that remained in Mr. Trump's possession, as well as a sworn certification that falsely claimed on Trump's behalf that he and Team Trump had conducted a diligent search of boxes and all responsive documents had been turned over. So what Brian Butler is now asserting here is pretty explosive. Not only did Trump apparently hide away at least 105 classified documents that the FBI eventually found, it sure sounds like Trump managed to steal another 10 to 15 boxes of records, and we don't know if the FBI ever got those records back. Who knows where those boxes are now?
That sure sounds like obstruction of justice. What is equally concerning here is why Brian Butler decided to go public right now. Here he was explaining his decision.
Well, I mean, it's been almost a year since FBI agents showed up at my house when my wife was at home. And, you know, over the course of the last year, emotionally, it's been a roller coaster. You know, a couple weeks ago, Judge Cannon says she's going to release the names of the witnesses. You know, you go from highs and lows in this. And instead of just waiting for it to just come out, I think it's better that I get to at least say what happened than it coming out in the news, people calling me like crazy. I'd rather just get it out there. And, you know, the hope is at least I can move on with my life and get over this.
Brian Butler coming forward here is brave. President Trump has a track record of trying to influence or intimidate witnesses who speak out against him. And his followers have a track record of harassing and threatening anyone they perceive to be one of Donald Trump's enemies. So coming out in this big public way is in itself a big deal. As the months go on, the list of Trump's transgressions, if not the list of his actual crimes, those lists continue to grow. And yet, for now, the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case is on hold. And instead of talking about a trial in Congress, the focus instead is on President Biden, and not just how he handled classified documents, which as a legal matter is already settled. Instead, the focus is on Biden's age and whether he is fit to be president. The former special counsel himself played a huge role in that. His report made broad and seemingly unusual characterizations about Biden's age. And now one of the Congress people who questioned her today was Congressman Adam Schiff. Remember that before becoming a congressman, Schiff spent years as the assistant U.S. attorney for the Central District of California, meaning he is no stranger to how a prosecution like this should be run. He knows the rules, and he does not think the former special counsel has followed them.
Politics played no part whatsoever in my investigative steps.
But you understood, nevertheless, didn't you, Mr. Hur? You cannot tell me you're so naive as to think your words would not have created a political firestorm. You understood that, didn't you? You understood how they would be manipulated by my colleagues here on the GOP side of the aisle and by President Trump. You understood that, did you not?
Congressman, what I understood is the regulations that govern my conduct as special counsel.
And those regulations
required me to write a confidential report for the Attorney General,
which you knew would not be confidential.
My decision, and that is what I did, Congressman. I followed the rules.
What is in the rules, Mr. Hur, what is in the rules is you don't gratuitously do things to prejudice the subject of an investigation when you're declining to prosecute. You don't gratuitously add language that you know will be useful in a political campaign. You were not born yesterday. You made a choice. That was a political choice. It was the wrong choice. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Joining me now is Congressman Adam Schiff of California. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee and former lead House impeachment manager during the first Senate impeachment trial of then-President Trump. Congressman Schiff, it's great to see you. You, I think, made an impact today, shall we say, in your questioning of the former special counsel. And I just wonder what your assessment was after you asked him, I think quite credibly, whether he actually believed that this was not a political document or that he did not make any political considerations when assessing President Biden's memory. Did you believe him?
No, I didn't believe him at all. He tried to claim that this was a confidential memo, but it was also forced to acknowledge he knew it would be made public. The Attorney General had made it clear it would be public. And, the idea that he was required to give this, this personalized, prejudicial, biased, essentially broadside against the president, that was necessary to his report is absurd. He could have commented all he wanted on, the president's specific recollection as to this document or that document. That would have been appropriate. But he understands, having done dozens and dozens of depositions, witnesses are instructed if they don't remember something clearly, they should say they don't recall. There's nothing at all unusual about that. And to take this political potshot at the president during the midst of a campaign when he knows how it would be used was, grave abuse of prosecutorial authority, and he knows it.
I also felt like he sort of wanted to issue a backhanded, not quite indictment of the president. He refused. He got into a big back and forth with Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal over whether or not the president was exonerated by his report. And he kept saying, I did not exonerate him. Why, if he wasn't going to charge him, do you think he refused to say, I do not exonerate him?
Well, I think you saw in the clip you played his reluctance to even read portions of his report that were critical of Donald Trump. My sense was what he decided to do was, lacking the evidence to make a recommendation to charge the president, he would do the next best thing, which is give them a political bludgeon, attack the president's memory, paint an unflattering portrait of him. That, in many ways, was more damaging than any observation he might have made about the facts or the chargeability of those facts. And so I think he has a tough time criticizing Trump. He may have future political ambitions. He doesn't want to alienate someone who might be president. He doesn't want to alienate the Republican Party. And so I think this is his effort, failing to find facts to charge or recommend charges to gratify the Trump crowd.
What do you make of the fundamental issue on display here, or the fundamental conclusion that I think is worth repeating over and over again? The vast, vast gulf that separates what President Biden did versus what former President Trump did on the matter of classified document retention. Do you think Democrats made a forceful enough distinction, as it were, given all that Republicans had stored up, the political bludgeon, as you call it, to try and muddy the waters, to try and impugn President Biden's reputation, his age, and his fitness for office?
I think, yes. Madeline, I think, did a great job. Ted Lieu also went through, itemized a number of the charges against Donald Trump, the actions of Trump in concealing materials and trying to get people to lie about it, and talking about scrubbing the server that had the surveillance footage on it. In all these respects, just night and day with President Biden's not deliberate effort to retain documents, with his full cooperation, with his lengthy interviews. It was a sharp contrast. I think Democrats made that contrast. But I also think that it became clear watching her respond to questions that this is not some neutral, objective, nonpartisan prosecutor. This is someone who was a Republican appointee who really found it difficult, even though, as you say, it was his own words, to read from his own report in ways that would be critical of Donald Trump. And so I think the public got a sense of who he is, where he's coming from, that this is not a neutral arbiter.
Independent of what Republicans and former special counsel Hur have to say about it, I do wonder how much of an impact the latest developments out of the classified documents case, how much of an impact do you think that's going to have with the American public as we head into an election season where we may not get any of the federal criminal trials? They may not happen before the election. We have a witness coming forth and saying that not only did Donald Trump retain over 100 classified documents at his residence, he may have actually stolen 10 to 15 bankers' boxes more and, sent them to points north or wherever. Do you think that that has the impact that it necessarily should? Or do you think that there has been some false equivalence made between Biden taking things, regardless of the fact that it wasn't criminal, and what Trump did? I mean, do you think that the sort of transgressions of that case have lost their impact in the court of public opinion?
I don't think they've lost their impact, but as the indictments were some time ago, I think it is valuable to remind people of these egregious facts. And I think Mr. Butler coming forward, particularly, as you say, given that the trial doesn't look like it's going to go forward before the election, to say, hey, the president was involved in hiding these classified materials. I was asked in a very strange, suspicious way to load or help load these boxes of documents. On the same day, it turns out the president's lawyers are meeting with the Justice Department to go over these classified materials. Lord knows what happened to all of these documents, or some of these documents. I thought Mr. Butler's statements also about having this billionaire foreign person talking about Russian and other submarine capabilities or U.S. capabilities. The astonishment that the president would talk to some, wealthy, and I don't know whether this is a donor or just wealthy patron at Mar-a-Lago, shows you what a national security risk that whole Mar-a-Lago enterprise was. Donald Trump's willingness to show photographs of things to different parties that were potentially classified materials. It's terrifying to think of him getting classified briefings now. And I really hope the agencies dumb it down so they don't share anything with the president that they don't want shared with the world.
Yeah, only material that's published, I don't know, in the New York Times or Washington Post or the LA Times. That he probably won't read either. Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you so much for making the time tonight. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
We have a lot to get to this evening, including what a doctored photo of the royal family means for American politics. Plus, potential presidential spoiler, RFK Jr. announces that his short list for running mate includes, surprise, a very prominent anti-vaxxer. What that could mean for November, coming up.
And then there was one time he said, we're all dirty, we all move boxes. And I said, well, look, I didn't even know what I was moving until I was at the plane, and that's when I remember moving boxes.
We're all dirty, we all move boxes. Maybe you, but not me, unless they're empty Amazon boxes. The man speaking there is Brian Butler, a formerly longtime Mar-a-Lago employee who quit 3 months after the FBI searched the property. Butler testified to special counsel Jack Smith's team and is reportedly referenced in the criminal indictment as Trump employee number 5. Now, while NBC News has not independently confirmed Mr. Butler's role here, the fact that he has come forward now is telling. Any day now, the judge in this case, Eileen Cannon, may release the identities of unnamed potential witnesses, like witness number 5, which puts at least a dozen others like Mr. Butler at risk. Judge Cannon has yet to rule on whether she will release the names of those witnesses for the prosecution. She held a hearing 11 days ago on the matter. As far as that trial date, that is still very much TBD. Joining me now to discuss all of this is MSNBC legal analyst Lisa Rubin. Lisa, it's always so wonderful to have you on set here to explain my continued confusion about what exactly is happening down in Florida.
First, both.
Yeah, well, and other legal scholars. Yeah. What's Cannon going to do here? I mean, this seems like a very bad call just on its face. Witnesses should be protected, especially those who, the president has a history of maligning, if not outright harassing.
It was really interesting. I was reading the transcript of the argument that you were just referring to earlier tonight, and Cannon clearly still has a leaning toward revealing their names. And she actually asked David Harbach of the special counsel's office verbatim, has there been any indication that any of these witnesses have been threatened? And his response was sort of incredulous, but then he said to her, well, that's not the standard, Your Honor. We don't have to show that a witness has been threatened in order to make a credible case to you that the revelation of their names would compromise this investigation as well as their public safety.
Do you feel like if she says no, Jack Smith takes this to the 11th Circuit?
I do. I think Jack Smith does take this to the 11th Circuit because it's not just about Brian Butler as Trump employee number 5, who has now unveiled himself willingly. There are 20 to 25 other witnesses, according to Harbach's estimation, that could be impacted. And it's not just their identities, Alex. I want to be clear with you and our viewers. It's about the substance of their expected testimony as well. There could also be communications between members of the prosecution team, between and among them about some of these witnesses. And some of them are incidental. Let's say they're talking about Lisa Rubin, a witness, and lower down in the chain, they're talking about Alex Wagner. You could end up having Alex Wagner's name out in the public domain, even though it's entirely incidental to the purpose for which that exhibit was used in these underlying motions. That is the subject of this unsealing order.
I do wonder when we talk about the sort of the most explosive elements of this interview with Mr. Butler, I was shocked at his account of helping to load 10 to 15 bankers' boxes that he said looked very much like the boxes storing classified documents that we've seen photos of in the indictment document, that those 10 to 15 boxes were loaded onto a plane and took off. To me, if I'm the special counsel, first of all, they knew this months ago. Yep. Why not continue looking for them? What does that reflect on the part of Jack Smith?
Well, first of all, we don't know that they haven't recovered them. It could be that they have determined that all of those boxes were returned to Mar-a-Lago or somewhere else, that they essentially followed Trump around wherever he went. I had a conversation with someone on your team tonight about our shared recollection that when Trump showed up in New York last year for a deposition in the New York Attorney General's civil fraud case, he was seen outside Trump Tower with personal aides carting some of those very same sorts of banker's boxes. Look, there is a reference in the indictment to the fact that Carlos de Oliveira, Walt Nauta, and others shepherded boxes onto a plane as Trump was leaving from Florida to head north. It never disclosed, however, that Brian Butler, as Trump employee number 5, was among them, and we don't know for sure what happened to those boxes or what their contents were.
Do you feel confident, though, that I guess in the back of my mind, this is all pure speculation. I should warn everyone at home that, it seems that Jack Smith, probably more than anybody else at the Department of Justice, has understood the abbreviated calendar within which he is working,
yes.
Right? Like, he built a federal indictment on January 6th that was made for speed. Let's get it done.
Yes.
That is very much up in the air. The Mar-a-Lago classified documents case seems very narrow, very clear. He didn't bother with a dissemination charge, for example, saying that Trump was trying to sell these state secrets or spread them, if you will. That seems intentional, right? I'm going to go for the stuff I know I can convict on.
And by the way, he can still use evidence of some of this as proof of intent at trial, even if they don't lead to separate charges. So Jack Smith, to your point, I think has adopted a really surgical approach. He has probably also determined, based on his team's experience with Judge Cannon so far, that further superseding this indictment is to no one's benefit.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean if and when this case were ever to be tried, that we wouldn't see some of the things that Brian Butler talks about in that interview come back and make a reappearance at trial, including through his testimony.
Right. I do think that there's been sort of a fatalist attitude about this because it's unlikely to happen before November, that people think it doesn't matter. But there's a 50% chance that Joe Biden is the president of the United States come the end of November, which means this trial could actually happen. I do wonder what you think the timeline might be for this, given Cannon's seeming indecision to actually set a date.
Well, look, I think a lot depends on what the Supreme Court does on presidential immunity. Trump has made multiple motions to dismiss in this case, 2 of which will be dealt with later this week. But presidential immunity is not one of them. And depending on what the Supreme Court does, this case could go away or it could come back to Judge Cannon to determine, even if he is immune for acts that are alleged to be official, does the stuff in this indictment count as official acts worthy of immunity? I would tell you, no, they are post-presidential acts that don't qualify. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is saying because they emanate from his lawful possession during his presidency, he is still entitled to cloak himself in the very comfy bathrobe of immunity.
So does that mean he gets to go into the White House at any time, steal a bunch of stuff and say, I'm not going to ask you to actually answer that, but that seems to be what is suggested by an argument to Trump's merit. Lisa Rubin, it's great to see you, my friend. Thank you for bearing with my questions tonight. I appreciate you, as always. Still to come this evening, why a badly photoshopped portrait of British royals has implications for American politics. We'll explain coming up. Plus, Trump and Biden cross a crucial presidential campaign milestone tonight. That is about the only thing their campaigns have in common, though. We'll have more on their respective strategies coming up next. In a few hours, when all the votes are tallied in the Washington state primary, Donald Trump is set to become the presumptive Republican presidential nominee. And thanks to a primary win in Georgia, Joe Biden is now the presumptive Democratic nominee. So here we go, general election. But President Biden was not waiting to secure a certain number of delegates in order to shift into general election mode. He released this ad over the weekend, going after Donald Trump and taking on the age question head on.
Look, I'm not a young guy. That's no secret. But here's the deal. I understand how to get things done for the American people. I led the country through the COVID crisis. Today, we have the strongest economy in the world. I passed a law that lowers prescription drug prices, caps insulin at $35 a month for seniors. For 4 years, Donald Trump tried to pass an infrastructure law, and he failed. I got it done.
So President Biden is running on the stuff he's done. And Donald Trump? Well, he's firing dozens of people at the Republican National Committee, including its political director, as his campaign takes operational control of that organization. And Trump is calling into national television programs and floating ideas like this.
Have you changed your outlook on how to handle entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Mr. President?
There is a lot you can do in terms of entitlements, in terms of cutting.
Trump followed that up by announcing that his first act as president will be to close the border, drill, baby, drill, and free the January 6 hostages. Okay, now, joining me now is Tim Miller, writer-at-large at The Bulwark, and Claire McCaskill, former U.S. Senator for the great state of Missouri. Thank you both for being with me here tonight to understand what is happening. Claire, let me first just ask you. You could talk about the infrastructure bill. You could talk about climate change. You could talk about lowering the cost of very common medications. You could talk about protecting the social safety net. Or you could talk about freeing the January 6 hostages and firing the political director of the RNC. Which strategy would you take, Claire?
I kind of like our side of the fence here. I think Biden's got a stronger hand. And by the way, let's don't leave out the fact that what Donald Trump mostly does is talk about how America sucks. He is constantly trying to convince everyone that we're terrible, that we're in decline, that America is awful. And I don't think that's what most Americans believe or frankly want to hear. I think they want somebody who believes in the goodness of our country, somebody who sees that we are, in fact, in a stronger economic position than any of our other developed nations across the globe, that we are doing better than we were under Donald Trump. And I actually think that even though there are still lots of days left before the election, I'd much rather be Joe Biden at this point than Donald Trump. I think he does have the stronger hand.
Tim, we are told repeatedly, largely by Trump surrogates, that the Trump campaign is a well-oiled machine, better run and managed than it was in 2016. It was a low bar in 2016, admittedly, but they did secure a bunch of endorsements. They do seem to have more of an official campaign apparatus. Having said that, the nationalization of this campaign and the fact that almost all of its appeal rests on the shoulders of Donald Trump, when he's out there saying things like, I'm going to cut Social Security and Medicare, and talking glowingly about January 6 hostages, I just do wonder whether how much the campaign stuff and the adeptness of his campaign actually matters if the principal is saying that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's fair to say that they've got some professionals around them right now, that it must be a little bit better than 2016, where he had several campaign managers, and I think most of them were indicted at one point or the other, including Paul Manafort, who was kind of a Russian spy, or at least back-channeling to Russia during the 2016 campaign. So pretty low bar for improvement on getting people around him. I think that they've stepped over that. But they had a lot of other things, going against them that they didn't have in 2016. And Donald Trump hadn't been indicted 91 times. He didn't have a track record you can compare against. I thought that the infrastructure comparison was the best part of that initial Biden ad, because it addressed both accomplishments, but also it addresses the age contrast in a way, right? That it's like, oh, you're worried that I'm too old. Well, this other old guy, by the way, said he was going to do infrastructure every week, and look who did it. I did. So, I think that having a marginally better campaign team, I don't know if that offsets all of the other challenges that Donald Trump faces this time.
Yeah, I agree with you, Tim. And Claire, I wonder what you thought. In that ad, it shows when Biden talks about his ability to get infrastructure passed, you see a fumbling image of Donald Trump, which is actually tonally different than what we've seen so far, right? We've seen him as a pernicious, nefarious evildoer, but bumbling, fumbling, and ineffective is actually kind of a new bucket. And I wonder how useful you think that will be as Biden tries to kind of claim a counter narrative about the Trump years.
Listen, all you have to do is play tape of Donald Trump at some of these rallies when he goes on to these sentences that aren't sentences, and he talks gibberish, and he doesn't know who he's running against, and he's not identifying leaders with the right countries, and then in the middle of it all, he loses his train of thought and kind of goes sideways. He clearly has some cognitive issues. And I think the best thing that's happened in the Biden campaign is they figured out they got to go after Donald Trump. They can't just sit in the Oval Office and be presidential and talk about Bidenomics and talk about what he's gotten done. They have to go after Donald Trump. They're doing that now. And by the way, Donald Trump is helping them by going on a show where he is trying to appeal to rich donors and saying he's willing to cut Social Security and Medicare. These are mistakes that campaign operatives can't fix.
Yeah, to that end, Tim, your bulwark buddy, Sarah Longwell, is the head of the Republican Accountability Project. And the reporting is that they are going to spend $50 million in a campaign effectively against Trump. They do not consider themselves a pro-Biden shop, as I'm sure you're well aware, but it's going to feature homemade videos of Americans who voted for Trump, I believe, in the past, whether 2016 or 2020, but have chosen not to in 2024. How effective do you think that will be in moving this sort of critical slice of independent swing voters to the left side of the aisle? How effective will that be?
Yeah, I think Sarah, just to defend her honor, is pro-Biden. But I think that the strategy here is talking to people that might not want to get there around Biden. And I don't get that. It doesn't make sense to me, but I think this is important. When you look at a strategy, there have to be a lot of groups. There are going to be a lot of Democratic groups out there with PACs that are trying to activate young voters or black voters or other parts of the Democratic coalition. This is a narrowly targeted effort to reach people that are pretty much Republican voters that have voted for Donald Trump, not even never Trumpers, right? They're Trump voters, and moving some of them from going from a Trump voter to a nothing. That's a step in the right direction, right? That's a +1 for Joe Biden. Moving him to Joe Biden, that's a full flip. Right? That's what you're trying to do, right? And so in order to do that, these testimonials are them hearing from them. As much as we all like each other, hearing from Claire or hearing from me even, someone that voted for Hillary is not going to be as compelling as hearing from somebody like them, that looks like them, that sounds like them, that voted for Donald Trump, and now explaining for whatever reason, whether it be January 6th, whether it be his behavior since then, whether it be a change of heart on that way he handled the economy or COVID, that they just can't get around there this time. And we've seen in testing that is, a way to move some of this critical, it's a small number, 1 or 2%, but that could be a meaningful 1 or 2% in a close election.
Yeah, I'm not going to impugn your reputation or Claire's. I don't think anybody who voted for Trump in 2020 is going to listen to me, but I hear what you're saying, Tim. Claire, we have news tonight that Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the third-party candidate, may be choosing Jesse Ventura, former Minnesota governor, or the Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers, a known anti-vaxxer, to be his running mate. Does this matter at this stage in the game, Claire? Does the continued sort of thorniness of the Kennedy candidacy have the potential to spoil this race?
Well, first, don't get me started on Aaron Rodgers. I mean, are they going to go off and do LSD together in a dark room? And the poor Jets, right? Oh, my eye. But here's the thing. People are going to have to spend a lot of money explaining to people in this election that a vote for anyone other than Joe Biden is a vote for Donald Trump. And it's going to be expensive. People don't realize, they see the name. I'm looking at all these polls, and yes, he pulls votes from Trump, but he pulls a few points more from Biden. And a lot of that is the name. I think the Kennedy family will get involved. I believe they would, because I know they think this is a horrible idea. But I got to tell you the truth. I don't think Jesse Ventura or Aaron Rodgers is going to help somebody who's got the wacky ideas that Robert F. Kennedy has.
Yeah, to that end, Claire, Maria Shriver was a guest of the president's or the first lady's at the State of the Union. She, of course, is one of the, can we call her a matriarch? One of the most prominent Kennedy family members. So Kennedy v. Biden. Tim Miller, Claire McCaskill, thank you for joining me this evening. Really appreciate you. Still ahead, the photo that simultaneously broke the internet and public trust. What the British royal photo scandal says about institutional integrity and what Donald Trump had to do with all of it. That is next.
palace released a fake photo of Kate Middleton today.
Several news sources have recalled this photo of Kate Middleton and her children because they say that it's been manipulated.
If you look at Princess Charlotte's sweater, you can see that the sweater is not fully there.
Right here where the skirt juts out and it doesn't make any sense. I really believe that this photo was taken back in November of 2023. But of course, they're not going to release a picture that's supposed to be brand new with them all in the same outfits from a publicized event. So they just kind of tinkered it a little bit.
It was literally completely fakely generated.
By now, you have probably seen the photo that launched 1,000 conspiracy theories. On Sunday, the British royal family released this photo of the Princess of Wales, Kate Middleton, and her family for British Mother's Day. Immediately, people clocked several obvious signs that the photo had been digitally edited. Major news agencies like the Associated Press and Reuters removed the image from their official databases because the image appeared to have been manipulated by the royal family. For context here, Kate Middleton has been absent from public life for about 2 months now. In January, the palace announced she was undergoing abdominal surgery, but it didn't give any details on her diagnosis. So the British public was already awash in conspiracy theories here. And then, in an attempt to kill all the speculation, the royals admitted that the photo they had released had been edited. The official account for Princess Kate tweeted, "Like many amateur photographers, I do occasionally experiment with editing. I wanted to express my apologies for any confusion the family photograph we shared yesterday caused." But that only led to more questions. Questions like, why was the Princess of Wales doing her own crappy photo edits? And how did no one else in the palace catch this? And also, why? I don't know, maybe there's a totally legitimate explanation for all of this. But the global panic that this one photo has caused is something of real concern. The rise of disinformation and misinformation, paired with advances in artificial intelligence, have given rise to a new era of uncertainty, one that threatens to upend our own political system here in the United States. I mean, we've already seen real evidence of how deep fakes are interfering with the election. There was the fake robocall from Joe Biden, or fake Joe Biden, telling Democratic voters to stay home in the state of New Hampshire. And there were the widely circulated fake images of Donald Trump surrounded by black supporters that was generated using AI. But the impact of any single deep fake is ultimately less concerning than the general climate of suspicion generated simply by living in the era of deep fakes. As one Stanford AI researcher told The Atlantic's Charlie Warzel, you don't need to create the fake video for this tech to have a serious impact. You just point to the fact that the tech exists, and you can impugn the integrity of the stuff that is real. That is where the significant danger lies, and it is already happening. We are witnessing the unraveling of shared reality. As Warzel notes, the royal photo debacle is merely a microcosm of our current moment, where trust in both governing institutions and gatekeeping organizations such as the mainstream press is low. This sensation has been building for some time and was exacerbated by the corrosive political lies of the Trump era. We're going to talk about what the end of shared reality means for the future of our democracy, coming up next. Is this real? That is the question millions of people had to ask themselves this week about this image, published by one of the oldest institutions in the Western world, the British monarchy. As technology improves, people's ability to discern fact from fiction has worsened. The present scandal around the crown suggests that public trust, once shaken, can just disappear entirely. In a new article for The Atlantic, Charlie Warzel calls this moment the end of shared reality. He writes, for years, researchers and journalists have warned that deep fakes and generative AI tools may destroy any remaining shreds of shared reality. Experts have reasoned that technology might become so good at conjuring synthetic media that it becomes difficult for anyone to believe anything they didn't witness themselves. The royal portrait debacle illustrates that this era isn't forthcoming. We're living in it. Joining me now is Brian Tyler Cohen, host of the No Lie podcast and an MSNBC contributor. Brian, thank you so much for being here tonight. I'm super eager to hear your thoughts on this. Not what is going on with Kate Middleton, though. Our thoughts are with her wherever she is. But just the impact of a sort of seismic, cultural event, internet event like this in terms of the broader question of public trust and how damaged you think it is, even outside of the UK, even here in America.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, for example, robocalls, the Biden robocalls, if you look at the AI-generated images of Donald Trump surrounded by African-American voters, obviously they have the short-term impact of accomplishing what those AI-generated images or what those manipulated, elements of those things are actually doing. So it has that benefit, first of all. But more insidiously, Republicans get the added benefit of shaking our faith in the reality of everything, that we don't know what's real, we don't know what's fake, we don't know what Joe Biden said, for example, or Donald Trump said, or what they didn't say, because I think once we lose faith in the system, once people more broadly lose faith in that system, they just check out. And so that's what Trump and Republicans want. This is the Steve Bannon model of flooding the zone, which I'm sure you're intimately familiar with. But Republicans want a political space that feels so inaccessible and so dirty and so manipulated and so broken that who would want to get involved? And that cynicism that they're kind of engendering here really does correlate to Republicans' message of American carnage and fear and dysfunction. So this is all, I think, a coordinated strategy, and it comes from the top down. Like, you've heard the expression, the fish rots from the head, and that's what we're seeing here.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the hallmarks of autocracy is people losing faith in institutions, right? And you've already heard the cry of fake news. It really feels like this is the next prong in that strategy, which is anything that, Trump and his supporters don't like on television, they say it's fake TV. And there's a very concrete example of that, right? The Lincoln Project came out with this ad, and let's play it first. This is an ad from the Lincoln Project.
Hey, Donald, we noticed something. More and more people are saying it. You're weak. You seem unsteady. You need help getting around. And wow.
An enormous, really an enormous country, and you deserve.
Are you sure you don't have dementia?
Okay, so that's an ad from the Lincoln Project. And in response to it, Trump says on Truth Social, the Lincoln Project and liberals are using AI in their fake television commercials in order to make me look as bad. I mean, this feels like the next front, right? If you are presented with, visual evidence that doesn't seem favorable to your candidate and your candidate is Donald Trump, just call it fake. And I wonder how effective you think that's going to be more broadly.
I think it's going to be effective for the people who want to believe him, and that's what he'll do. I mean, everything is just as convenient as they want to make it. So in this case, if Donald Trump sees something that's his own words, which are obviously not going to be flattering, and if he wants to just write it off, then he has that as an excuse, as a fallback, and so he can just claim that it's an AI-generated image. And by the way, that's kind of a tacit admission of how ridiculous the things he says are, that he even knows that he has to claim that what he said was fake. I think that's kind of the biggest tell of all.
Do you feel like, Brian, there's a way to put the toothpaste back in the tube, as it were? I mean, can you rebuild public trust in the 21st century? I ask that not as a nihilist, but as someone genuinely hopeful about, institutional integrity.
I think it's going to take a lot of digital media literacy, which I don't know that we have right now, which is clear that we don't have right now. But it's also just, that's the reason I think that what you do is so important, what I try to do on a daily basis is so important, and that's just to kind of arm people with accurate information. Just having this segment right here where you let them know what's happening is a testament to that, is kind of shows why it's so important, and it arms people with the knowledge that this kind of stuff is happening. So all you can do is just continuously, pelt people with the truth over and over and over again, and hopefully it has something of an impact. But it's going to, like I said earlier, it's going to take a lot of digital media literacy that we just don't have right now as a society.
Sunlight and literacy. Brian Tyler Cohen, it was great to see you. Thanks for joining the show tonight.
Thanks.
That is our show for this evening. Now it's time for the last word with Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Alex. And we have a Democratic nominee in the presidential campaign. Joe Biden has officially made it. So we're going to be covering some of that, but also a lot of other defendant Trump coverage to get to.
It is a big night. The general election is on. Have a good show, Lawrence.
It is. Thanks, Alex. Thank you. Well, it was not a good day for the Trump fanatics on the Republican-controlled House Judiciary Committee, and it was not a great day for their star witness. Republican former U.S. Attorney Robert Hur, who was appointed to as U.S. Attorney by Donald Trump, conducted the investigation of Joe Biden's possession of classified material after Joe Biden left the vice presidency. That investigation found that Joe Biden did not commit any crimes at all. And we learned today in the hearing that Robert Hur's report about Joe Biden was not accurate in its description of Joe Biden as an elderly man with unusual memory problems. And you'll remember that bit was the big news of that report, the news that was heard around the world about that report, and it is false. Today, Attorney General Merrick Garland released the full transcript of President Biden's 5 hours of under oath questioning by Robert Hur. In his report, Robert Hur claimed that President Biden could not remember when his son died. That is not true. In the transcript, President Biden says, "What month did Beau die? Oh my God, May 30th. And then someone else in the room with the president says 2015, and President Biden says it was 2015. And it's now easy to understand Joe Biden's anger about Robert Hur's false characterization of the president's memory of that tragic day. Congressman Eric Swalwell, who will join us in a moment, found something else in the transcript released today of Joe Biden's testimony about Joe Biden's memory that Robert Hur deliberately did not include in his report describing the president's memory.
I now want to turn you to the transcript and day 1, page 47. You said to President Biden, you appear to have a photographic understanding and recall of the House. Did you say that to President Biden?
Those words do appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Photographic is what you said. Is that right?
That word does appear on page 47 of the transcript.
Never appeared in your report, though. Is that correct? The word photographic?
That does not appear in my report.
Congressman Swalwell zeroed in on a possible motivation for Robert Hur to slant his report against Joe Biden in every way that he could.
A lot has changed since 2018 for the person who appointed you, former President Trump. Since you were appointed, he was impeached for leveraging 350 million U.S. taxpayer dollars over Ukraine to get dirt on President Biden. He was then impeached a second time for inciting an insurrection. He was charged for possessing classified documents and obstructing justice. He was charged for paying for the silence of a porn star. He was charged in Georgia for his role in January 6th. He was charged in the District of Columbia for his role in January 6th. He owes $400 million to the state of New York for defrauding the state through his taxes, and he has been judged a rapist. You want to be perceived, understandably, as credible, and so I want to first see if you will pledge to not accept an appointment from Donald Trump if he is elected again as president.
Congressman, I'm not here to testify
Seems like an easy
about
answer.
what will happen in the future.
Considering what I just laid out.
I'm here to talk about the report and the work that went into it. And
but you don't want to be associated with that guy again, do you?
Congressman, I'm not here to offer any opinions about what may or may not happen in the future.
So it's fair to interpret that what you just saw obviously means that what may happen in the future is that Robert Hur would accept a federal judgeship from the indicted Donald Trump or serve as the indicted Donald Trump's attorney general. Republicans on the committee kept trying to suggest that Robert Hur would have recommended criminal charges against Joe Biden if President Biden were just younger, that it was simply Joe Biden's elderly, faulty memory that would make him hard to convict in a courtroom. But the truth of the Hur report is that it does not at any point identify a single criminal act that could be prosecuted against anyone at any age. It did not identify a single thing Joe Biden did that anyone has ever been prosecuted for. And the only classified material that Joe Biden knew he possessed was exactly the same material that President Ronald Reagan kept when he left the presidency, and the Justice Department at that time believed that what President Reagan did was perfectly legal, and they justified it. President Ronald Reagan kept daily notes during his time in the White House, and Vice President Joe Biden kept similar daily notes during his 8 years as vice president. Those notes would inevitably contain possibly classified information. And those notes were deliberately kept by Joe Biden, following the legal precedent set by Ronald Reagan and the Justice Department when Ronald Reagan deliberately kept those same notes. And so the simple facts of the Biden case are there was no criminal prosecution because there was absolutely nothing that was even close to a criminal act. Democrats used the hearing today to remind America what it's like when the possession and handling of classified material is criminal.
In your investigation, did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to lie to the FBI?
We identified no such evidence.
Did you find that President Biden directed his lawyer to destroy classified documents?
No.
Did you find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to move boxes of documents to hide them from the FBI?
No.
Did you find that President Biden directed his personal assistant to delete security camera footage after the FBI asked for that footage?
No.
Did you find that President Biden showed a classified map related to an ongoing military operation to a campaign aide who did not have clearance?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a conspiracy to obstruct justice?
No.
Did you find that President Biden engaged in a scheme to conceal?
No.
Each of the activities I just laid out describe what Donald Trump did in his willful mishandling of classified information and his criminal efforts to deceive the FBI.
Congresswoman Madeleine Dean, who will join us in a moment, forced Robert Hur to make the case against Donald Trump by reading what Hur's report says about the Trump case.
Unlike the evidence involving Mr. Biden, the allegations set forth in the indictment of Mr. Trump, if proven, would present serious aggravating facts.
Keep going.
Congresswoman, I'm happy to have you read the words in my report.
Well, it's your report, so I think it actually is more fitting that you read those.
Most notably, after being given multiple chances to return classified documents and avoid prosecution, Mr. Trump allegedly did the opposite.
Keep going.
According to the indictment, he not only refused to return the documents for many months, but he also obstructed justice by enlisting others to destroy evidence and then to lie about it.
And we have new information about Donald Trump's handling of government-owned documents and classified documents from the witness who Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's indictment identifies as Trump employee number 5. That employee, Brian Butler, said in a CNN interview that he helped Trump co-defendant Walt Nauta move some of the boxes from Florida to New Jersey.
We got to the airport. I ended up loading all the luggage I had, and he had a bunch of boxes.
You noticed that he had boxes?
Oh, yeah. They were the boxes that were in the indictment, the white banker's boxes. That's what I remember loading.
And did you have any idea at the time that there was potentially U.S. national security secrets in those boxes?
No clue. No, I had no clue.
Brian Butler explained why he is speaking out now publicly.
Well, I mean, it's been almost a year since FBI agents showed up at my house when my wife was at home. And, you know, over the course of the last year, emotionally, it's been a roller coaster. You know, a couple weeks ago, Judge Cannon says she's going to release the names of the witnesses. You know, you go from highs and lows in this. And instead of just waiting for it to just come out, I think it's better that I get to at least say what happened than it coming out in the news, people calling me like crazy. I'd rather just get it out there.
And Brian Butler offered this account of Donald Trump sharing classified information with an Australian billionaire.
I believe it was April of 2021. There was a member, Anthony Pratt, who he was coming, he flew in the night before.
He's an Australian billionaire.
he finishes his meeting with the former president, gets in the car, and his chief of staff says, "How did the meeting go?" Pratt, without saying, just says, "He told me," and it would be, U.S. military, classified information of what he told him about Russian submarines and U.S. submarines. And that's really all I remember hearing, and I went, what? I'm thinking this. I'm in the car, I'm like, did I just hear that? So it wasn't like, oh, the meeting went well, we talked about it. He went straight to the point. He told me that the U.S. subs and with the Russian subs and, something that would more than likely, in my mind, be classified.
Leading off our discussion tonight is Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania and Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. Both are members of the House Judiciary Committee and both served as impeachment managers in the second impeachment trial of Donald Trump. And Congresswoman Dean, I have to say, one of the things that strikes me about the Hur report that I find so unrelentingly strange is that he keeps referring to a possible presentation of the evidence in this report to a jury and how a jury might perceive it, when in fact there's nothing in the report that could ever possibly be presented to a jury. And this notion of how a jury would perceive President Biden's memory or his understanding of how he was handling those documents just could not be more absurd, with an evidence base that never comes close to rising to a chargeable offense.
And that's exactly, Lawrence, what he says in his report. It never rises to that level. I'm so pleased to be with you, but also with Eric tonight. Eric, you and I have been comrades on the Judiciary Committee for a few years now, and I feel lucky to know you. I'm very pleased with what you were able to bring out today. In terms of testimony and in terms of the language of the report. And Lawrence, I think you're going to enjoy this, and I bet you paid attention to it. Did you notice that whenever Mr. Hur got caught in something, he slipped to passive voice? So, for example, when Eric said to him about photographic memory, or whatever the exact word was, he said, well, that is the language of the report, not his language. So I'm somebody who pays attention to that kind of thing. But let's remember where this all began. Where it began was the very first sentence of the entire more than 200-page report. Quote, and this is Mr. Hur's language, "We conclude that no criminal charges are warranted in this matter." And Lawrence, you saw in the report that same statement is paraphrased over and over and over again. Sadly, I think the report has very little credibility because beyond that, the evidence wasn't there. What was Mr. Hur trying to say?
Mm-hmm. And Congressman Swalwell, the use of the word willful, President Biden willfully possessed what they call classified documents. It's such a misleading thing for the general public to get only that and not have included in that the only documents that he willfully possessed, that he knew he possessed, that he deliberately possessed, were his own handwritten notes, which is exactly what Ronald Reagan did with his own handwritten notes. And that was considered, when Ronald Reagan did it, by the Justice Department to not be criminal, and they made no attempt to even get those notes back from Ronald Reagan.
And that's very telling, Lawrence. But also, when you read the transcript, you see, the president has a clear handle on, what was unaccounted for, and he explains it as, his staff, were largely responsible. And he's such a kind person. He said, "I'm not trying to throw the staff under the bus here. I don't want anyone to get in trouble. But my notes were really, the only ones that I handled." And I think this is such a perfect side-by-side of two people. So put aside, what you believe Donald Trump's intent was to take national security marked materials, as you said, different than handwritten materials. These are marked as national security materials that he possessed. Take away what you believe his intent was. You have two individuals who have classified materials at their property. One of them does everything to return the materials, allows the FBI to search their house just to be careful, and safe, sits down for 5 hours of interviews over 2 days. That's President Biden. The other person does everything to conceal the possession of those materials, directs others to lie and obstruct about it, and still believes that even if he did all of that, that he can do it anyway because he believes he's a king. It's just a real test of character and how both individuals handled it.
Let's listen to the demonstrations of Donald Trump's memory that the Democratic side of this hearing was able to put in evidence in the hearing today, juxtaposed to what her report says about President Biden's memory. Let's listen to this.
Your next wife was a woman by the name of Marla Maples.
Right.
And sitting here today, do you recall what years you were married to Ms. Maples?
I'd have to get the exact dates for you. I can do that.
Am I correct that you married your current wife in January 2005?
I don't know relative to that tape.
And what years were you the owner of the Plaza Hotel?
I don't know the years.
James Webb.
I don't remember the names. Don't remember the name.
So you don't remember saying you have one of the best memories?
I don't remember that. Okay. I remember you telling me, but I don't know that I said.
And Congressman Dean, evidence like that, along with the revelations that were the night before in that CNN interview of Mr. Butler about loading boxes to get them to New Jersey and all the other incriminating information that he revealed that we did not know until he revealed that in that interview, all of that coming together at the same time as this hearing.
It's really very sad, Lawrence. We could be angry, we could be all kinds of emotions, but it's really very sad that the president, the former president, has come out as such I'm sorry, am I frozen? I apologize if I am. As such a person of lacking of any decency. Certainly his memory is slipping. There are some serious problems. He has been under a 40-count indictment for all of the things that he did in terms of the documents that are at Mar-a-Lago. So the contrast is extraordinarily striking. And Mr. Hur, in his report alone, he himself, and that's why I asked him to read part of his report, points out the stark contrast between the two gentlemen and how they handled documents.
Congressman Swalwell, Donald Trump cannot tell you when he married any of his wives or how long he was married to any of his wives and how long he's been married to his third and current wife. He doesn't know that. That's not information he knows. And there will never be, you can be absolutely certain, there will never be a headline anywhere about that failure of Donald Trump's memory.
And Lawrence, he referred in a clip that I played to September 11 as 7/11. He stumbles all the time. And the difference, though, between Joe Biden, being asked the day after, Israel is attacked about something that happened years ago and having a clear memory of most things, so clear that special counsel called it photographic. And Donald Trump is not only, does Donald Trump have memory issues, he's dangerous and he's under indictment and he's a narcissist. And we can't hammer this point home enough for the American people.
Representatives Madeleine Dean and Eric Swalwell, thank you both very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Good to be with you.
Coming up tonight, Joe Biden easily secured enough delegates for the Democratic presidential nomination. He did that before Donald Trump secures the delegates for the Republican nomination. Simon Rosenberg will join us next. NBC News now projects that Joe Biden is the Democratic presumptive nominee for president, having secured 2,012 delegates. Votes are being counted in primary elections tonight in the states of Georgia, Mississippi, Washington, and Hawaii. On the Democratic side, NBC News projects Joe Biden has won Georgia, where he currently has 95% of the vote. In Mississippi, NBC News projects Joe Biden has won, and where Joe Biden has 99% of the vote as of now in Mississippi. And on the Republican side, NBC News projects Donald Trump has won Georgia, where he currently has 84% of the vote. And in Mississippi, NBC News projects Donald Trump has won, where he currently has 92% of the vote. We're still waiting poll closings in the state of Washington and Hawaii. Joining our discussion now is Simon Rosenberg, a Democratic strategist and author of Hopium Chronicles on Substack. Simon, as usual, Joe Biden wins a higher percentage of Democratic votes than Donald Trump wins of Republican votes. What is there to read in tonight's results?
That we're in the general election. I mean, here we go, right? We've got 8 months to go, and it's going to be Biden and Trump. And, you know, in every way imaginable, I would much rather be us than them at this point. I mean, Joe Biden has been a good president. The country is better off. The Democratic Party is strong in winning elections all across the country. And they have Trump, I mean, who's the most unfit guy to run for president in all of our history, who's leading a party right now that's broke. It's splintering. We're seeing a mass exodus out of the House. I mean, we're seeing an unprecedented level of turmoil in the Republican Party, Lawrence. You and I have been doing this a long time. We've never seen anything as ugly as Donald Trump and the Republican Party right now. And so when I put all that together, as I said, I would much rather be us than them as we head into the general election.
The Biden campaign really went into high gear as a campaign the day after the State of the Union address, which was the most campaign-oriented State of the Union address I've ever heard.
Yeah, look, I think the big thing to me that's happened in the last few weeks is that the central arguments that the Republicans have been making against Biden have all evaporated. The economy is strong. It's not weak. Inflation isn't rising. It's down. Right? Crime isn't surging across the country. It's plummeting. There isn't a war on energy. We saw more domestic oil and renewables produced last year than any year in American history. And in some of the other attacks on the border, right? We're now the party that wants order on the border. They're the one that wants chaos. And the personal attacks against Biden, the stuff that they really went after in the Biden crime family attack, we just learned just in the last few weeks, this was a Russian operation that was being laundered by the Republican Party, again, in our politics. And then finally, his age. We saw that he dismissed the challenges and the concerns about his age and the great speech that he gave last week. And then today we learned that the special counsel's discussion about his age was actually invented and a lie. And so to me, I think the biggest thing that's happened is that they've lost all of their central arguments against Joe Biden and the Democrats. And what they're left with is the madness of the Orange Emperor and Donald Trump. And it's not going to be enough to beat us in this election.
The Orange Emperor. Simon Rosenberg, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Pennsylvania Republican Congressman Scott Perry is running for re-election. Cassidy Hutchinson, the January 6th committee star witness, described Scott Perry this way in an interview with Pennsylvania radio station WTIF in October of last year.
I think it is also important for central Pennsylvanians to know that Scott Perry was central to the planning of January 6th and central to the planning of operating the Justice Department officials to execute a plan that Donald Trump wanted. And what Donald Trump wanted was to essentially shred the Constitution in any way that he could to stay in power. And Scott Perry has a lot of information about that. And I think that Scott Perry owes it not only to central Pennsylvanians, but to Americans to share what he knows.
Democrat Mike O'Brien is running for the Democratic nomination to challenge Congressman Scott Perry. Pennsylvania primary is next month. Mike O'Brien is a retired lieutenant colonel who served 20 years in the Marine Corps as a Top Gun fighter pilot and squadron commanding officer. Mike O'Brien said this in his campaign announcement video.
Congressman Scott Perry and his far-right gang of insurrectionists are a threat to democracy and a threat to our freedoms. And that's why I'm running for Congress, right here in my home state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania families need a fighter on their side who listens to them, who respects them, who cares more about them than about winning partisan food fights. This isn't about Democrat versus Republican. It's about American versus un-American. It's about regular people versus Washington extremists like Scott Perry. It's going to take all of us to save our democracy. So join me, and let's do this together.
Joining us now is Mike O'Brien, running for Congress now in Pennsylvania's 10th Congressional District. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. This would be a very important race for the Democrats to win. It is the kind of district that could, with a great campaign, if you can deliver it, it could flip to Democrats. What is your strategy going forward in this campaign?
Yeah, that's absolutely the plan. And I'll say thanks a lot for having me on tonight, Lawrence. The good news, the district is winnable. Our governor, Josh Shapiro, he actually won the district by 12%. And in the 2023 municipal elections, the local elections, the Republican advantage was only 1%. So all this is going to take, it's going to take the right candidate. It's going to take somebody, I think, with a national service background who can appeal to the independents and the moderate Republicans. I'll tell you, with my 20 years in the Marine Corps, again, as you mentioned, I was a squadron commander, Top Gun fighter pilot. My wife, actually, she's still active duty in the Marine Corps. And we were the first married couple to command squadrons in the history of the Marine Corps. And I think that's something that resonates right here is service. Service resonates regardless of whether you're a Democrat or Republican.
Is there a number one issue for your district?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's beating Scott Perry. I've gone door to door and people are tired of him. He can't hide anymore. He's now very much on the Mount Rushmore of extremists. And we've built the coalition to be able to beat him this year. And I'm really proud of that coalition. It includes the Teamsters Local 776. Labor is going to be a big part of it. Obviously, service-based organizations like Vote Vets, Serve America. And the viewers are at home, you can be a part of this too. If you go to MikeO'BrienForPA.com and contribute to our campaign to help defend democracy.
Pennsylvania Democratic congressional candidate Mike O'Brien, thank you very much for joining us on your first campaign appearance on this program. I hope you can come back.
Thanks for having me, Lawrence. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, no one has done more to expose the corruption at the Supreme Court than Senator Sheldon Whitehouse. Now he's going after the Supreme Court's intellectual corruption. Senator Whitehouse joins us next. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse has a new complaint about the Supreme Court, which he explains in a new law review article for the Ohio State Law Journal. Senator Whitehouse writes, an appellate court unmoored from the factual record developed in the trial court may aggrandize its power like a knight errant roaming at will in pursuit of his own ideal of beauty or of goodness. A Supreme Court untethered from the fact-finding of the trial court or the fact-finding of Congress can craft facts that let it roam widely into policymaking. Senator Whitehouse explained the problem to the United States Senate.
For more than a decade now, the Roberts Court has violated these basic principles, replacing facts found by Congress and facts found by lower courts with fake facts that they made up on their own. Fake facts that over and over just happen to suit the big donors who put so many Republican-appointed justices on the Supreme Court. Shelby County and Citizens United, both those decisions, stood upon falsehoods presented as facts. And these weren't just drive-by errors in passing of no moment. These were false, factual findings that were essential to prop up the logic of the court's holdings. No false facts, no desired outcome. And tellingly, even after events thoroughly disproved the false facts, the Republican Supreme Court refused to correct its mistakes. And so these faulty decisions, founded on false facts, live on like zombies plaguing our democracy.
Joining us now is Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island. He's a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and chairs the committee's subcommittee on federal courts. He is also the author of The Scheme, How the Right Wing Used Dark Money to Capture the Supreme Court. Senator Whitehouse, thank you very much for joining us tonight. And please go on about the false factual findings. Could you give us some examples of those?
Sure. I think, Lawrence, the most obvious one that your many listeners will recognize right away is the false finding in the Citizens United decision that nobody needed to worry about corruption because all of the unlimited spending that decision would unleash would be transparent, that the public could evaluate the motive of the big donors because they would know who they were. Well, that's what the Supreme Court said, but here we are, multiple billions of dollars in secret money, proving them wrong, and yet they won't go back and reconsider that false fact. Without that false fact, the decision falls apart because it was essential to the logic of that case.
So are most of the false facts predictive of what will happen if we rule a certain way, or are some of them actually false statements about things that have already occurred?
I think it's sort of, when you're constructing an opinion, it has a logical, analytical shape to it. And in order to get where the Supreme Court wants to go, they often have to fill in facts that justify and support the arguments and the logic of their decision. And what they don't do is follow the rules, which are you should look at the congressional record for facts that Congress found if you're evaluating the support for a statute, or you should look at the judicial facts that trial courts found if you're looking at the facts that support a judicial decision. Whichever way you're looking, the American system of justice puts the fact-finding elsewhere than in the Supreme Court, and for very good reason. And yet you see these false facts continuing to pop up to prop up decisions that produce results that the big donors want. And you can go through case after case after case, and if you look forward, what they just did in Dobbs and in Bruen, the anti-choice and pro-gun decisions, was to say we're going to completely renovate the way we look at the law in these areas, and we're going to look instead at history and tradition, which means we get to make up our own facts about what history is and what tradition says, and that's why historians have such a field day making fun of the false historical facts that they found in those decisions. So it's a very broad pattern in the Supreme Court's political decision-making.
Yeah, I mean, on the Dobbs decision, when I saw that they were quoting from Old English common law, pre-colonial times, to English prosecutors and judges, I just immediately said, let's search and see how involved they were in witch trials. Because if you were practicing law in England at that time, there's a good chance. And of course, both of them were judges in witch trials.
Were a big deal back then to them.
Yeah, and both of them were witch prosecutors, and both of them believed witches should be put to death. And it was their view of abortion that Justice Alito wanted us to adopt in the 21st century.
Yeah, we have an American system of justice that is a very proven mechanism for making sure that facts are truthful. And that is that you develop them in the trial court where the two parties can fight with each other over the facts, where a neutral judge makes a decision. And if the neutral judge gets it wrong, an appellate court can say, hey, you got the facts wrong, but then it's supposed to send it back to the trial court to get the facts right. You don't wait until you've had the district court trial and the circuit court appeal and the arguments in the Supreme Court. And at the end of the process, when nobody can say another word, that's when you parachute in a whole boatload of false facts. That's not the way the system is supposed to work. For hundreds of years, it has not worked that way. And so this is a really novel trick that the Roberts Court has pulled. And it's so novel that, frankly, academia and lower courts haven't figured out a way to deal with it yet
because it's a new thing.
Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, thank you very much for joining us once again in your pursuit of integrity on the Supreme Court. I wish the Supreme Court cared about it as much as you do.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Thank you. Coming up, what's at stake for the world in the presidential election? President Biden is sending more aid to help Ukraine defeat Vladimir Putin's imperialistic war. Donald Trump praises dictators, including Vladimir Putin, including Adolf Hitler. Ben Rhodes joins us next. Today, the White House announced that the United States will send Ukraine $300 million in weapons and military support. The Biden administration has repeatedly emphasized that the money for Ukraine aid like that is mostly spent in the United States. $38.8 billion would go to U.S. factories that make missiles, munitions, and other gear, according to figures provided by the Associated Press, by the Biden administration. That's if Congress passes the larger version of this aid. Today is the 25th anniversary of the 1999 expansion of NATO to include the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland, three countries that share borders with Ukraine. Earlier today, President Biden held a White House meeting with Poland's president, who is calling for NATO members to raise their defense spending by at least half to counter Russian war-making aggression. But Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban met with Donald Trump last week and later said approvingly that if elected, Donald Trump, quote, will not give a penny in the Ukraine-Russia war. Here is President Biden's response to Donald Trump's willingness to let Vladimir Putin take over Ukraine.
The fact is that you have a president who literally is invited Putin to do what it wants, do what the hell it wants if it could come into Ukraine. He thinks Putin is a strong, basically he's a decent guy. You know who he's meeting with today and down in Mar-a-Lago? Orban of Hungary, who stated flatly he doesn't think democracy works. He's looking for dictatorship. The only member of NATO. That's who he's meeting with. I see a future where we defend democracy, not diminish it.
Joining us now is MSNBC political analyst Ben Rhodes. He's a former deputy national security advisor to President Obama. Ben, how does the administration squeeze out that $300 million after struggling now for quite a while to try to get a much larger package of aid out of the Congress?
Well, I mean, I think there are ways that you can look at the accounting at the Pentagon and find different accounts where you can provide some of this aid. But the reality is the delta, the gap between 300 million and 56 billion tells you everything you need to know about how important it is for Congress to pass that funding. 300 million is not going to keep Ukraine afloat when what they need is equipment at the front lines, small arms, ammunition, artillery shells, the lifeblood of a war in which Russia is trying to wear them down. And Donald Trump and the Republican Party are standing in the way of that because they're helping Putin at the expense of Ukraine.
So it's very clear that Vladimir Putin wants Donald Trump to win the presidency. Viktor Orban obviously wants Donald Trump to win the presidency. It feels very clear to me that Bibi Netanyahu would want Donald Trump to win the presidency, but much prefer that, and then he would have absolutely no criticism whatsoever from Donald Trump about anything that the Israeli military did in Gaza or anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, these guys, and they're all guys, are not shy about helping each other out, this kind of group of autocrats. You know, Viktor Orban, who's basically turned Hungary from a democracy into a single-party autocracy in a decade. I actually wrote a book about this process a few years ago. You know, this is like inviting Mussolini in the 1930s. This is a guy who literally wants to be at the vanguard of undermining and overturning liberal democracy in the world. This is who Trump is hanging out with. It's not subtle that Putin and Orban and Trump and Netanyahu and a whole bunch of other leaders around the world represent a kind of authoritarian nationalist politics. And look, what Joe Biden represents is an alternative in which America stands up for our allies, stands up for certain values, doesn't want to see Putin roll over Ukraine, doesn't want to see a basic value like the sovereignty of a democracy in Ukraine get shredded by the likes of Putin and Orban. And what's really important to Lawrence is it's a foreign policy issue. It's about what happens in these hotspots around the world, but it's also a domestic issue. It's about Trump wanting to copy the playbook that people like Putin and Orban and Netanyahu have pursued in trying to undermine democracy in their countries. So it's about what happens here and what happens around the world as well.
And of course, Benjamin Netanyahu is the product of democracy. He's a democratically elected leader as opposed to Vladimir Putin. But it seems so fully within Netanyahu's policy interests to have Donald Trump in the White House, who would never question anything that Netanyahu or the Israeli military might want to do.
Yeah, well, first of all, Netanyahu has something important in common with Trump, too, which is that he's under indictment. He needs to stay in power to stay out of prison, just like Donald Trump. He was undermining democracy in Israel before October 7th by trying to essentially neuter the Supreme Court in Israel that led to huge protests. And now he has every interest in ignoring Joe Biden, perpetuating the war that is causing such a terrible humanitarian catastrophe, and getting a friendlier person in the Oval Office in Donald Trump. And so this is a real dilemma here. Joe Biden wants to try to put some guardrails around what Israel's doing in its military operation. I've really urged that over the last several months, in part because I had to see what Bibi Netanyahu was like to deal with firsthand for 8 years. Right. But the reality is Donald Trump would represent a far more blank check for Bibi Netanyahu to do whatever he wanted, not just in Gaza, but also potentially going up into war in Lebanon. That's something that the Biden administration has really restrained Israel on, escalating this war beyond even the Palestinian territories. So the stakes are huge in this election about what kind of country we are. Are we going to have another kind of copycat autocrat in Donald Trump here trying to undermine our democracy? And whether the United States stands for anything in the world other than might makes right and the autocrats club does whatever it wants.
Ben Rhodes, thank you very much for joining our discussion tonight.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thank you. We'll be right back. Ben Rhodes gets tonight's last word. The 11th hour with Stephanie Ruhle starts now.